Today, we're time traveling back through the decades, one thrift store find at a time. I thrifted items from every decade to transform into beautiful, one-of-a-kind Christmas decor. And I can't wait for you to see how they turned out.
Let's start with this pretty green glass sugar bowl from the 1930s. Amazingly, I thrifted this for just 50 cents. But I don't have the creamer or any other pieces to go with it, so it's the perfect candidate to be turned into Christmas decor. I also thrifted this plastic Christmas ornament for 99 cents, and I'm going to tear it completely apart so that I can remove the adorable snowman figurine from the inside. Well, that ended up being a little harder than I expected, but hopefully it'll be worth it. I hot glued a styrofoam ball inside the sugar bowl and used my fingers to flatten the top. Before adding the snowman, I wanted to add some sparkly tinsel ribbon around the outer rim of the sugar bowl. At this point, I kind of forgot what I was doing and I made a mistake. I went ahead and hot glued the snowman to the styrofoam and began filling in around him with snow text, which is a paste-like fake snow that dries very hard. While the snow text was still wet, I sprinkled a little powdery fake snow over the top. Then I realized my mistake. I had meant to add a bottle brush tree in with the snowman, so I actually had to pop the snowman back out to make room. I removed the wooden base from the tree, trimmed a few of the bottom branches to expose more of the wire, and then pushed that wire down into the styrofoam and re-glued the snowman back in. For a final touch, I dabbed a little Mod Podge on the snowman's hat and sprinkled on a bit more of that powdery fake snow. For our next project, we're jumping ahead to the 1990s to see what kind of Christmas decor we can create using this $3.50 thrift store lamp. Wait until you see how this one turns out. You are going to want to thrift a lamp similar to this one. I started by trying to hammer off the boat on the front, but the wood split right away, which told me it was probably screwed into the base. Once I removed them, the boat just fell right off. It wasn't even glued on. I gave the lamp base 2 coats of white chalk paint to set the stage for a snowy scene. Then I dug through my stash of miniature Christmas village pieces and ornaments, every single one purchased very cheaply at the thrift store. I played around with the arrangement until I liked it and then began hot gluing everything in place. Before adding the Christmas ornaments, I snipped off the little wire eyelet from the top. Since I only had a little snow text left, I made my own fake snow by mixing together equal parts white glue and baking soda. I spread this over the lamp base, but I didn't make enough, so I stirred up a second batch. This time I used Mod Podge instead of glue, and I'm not sure why, but the Mod Podge mixture was much fluffier and easier to spread. While the snow paste was still wet, I sprinkled on a layer of powdery fake snow. To dress up the white shade and give it a snowy effect, I hot glued some small pom-pom trim around both the top and bottom rims. This is such an easy way to upgrade a basic lampshade. Today's video is sponsored by Wild Grain. They're the first Bake from Frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, pastas, and pastries. When my Wild Grain box arrived, everything was still perfectly fresh and frozen. I just popped everything straight into the freezer. And now, whenever I want bakery fresh bread or croissants, I can pull one out, bake it, and it's ready in 25 minutes or less. No prep, no mess, just that amazing fresh baked goodness.
The thing that really sets Wild Grain apart is that they partner with small bakers and pasta makers from across the country. And they donate 2 meals to a nonprofit for every box ordered. With the holidays coming up, Wild Grain makes it so easy to serve fresh bread and pastries that taste like you made them from scratch. And right now, if you use the link in my description box and the code Canterbury Cottage, you'll get $30 off your first box, plus free croissants for life.
This next thrift store find is probably the newest piece, a little tea cubby cabinet from the early 2000s. The painted design was almost completely ruined from the clear packing tape that Goodwill used to keep the drawers in place. Luckily, I was planning to repaint it anyway. I used a light green chalk paint, and to save some time, I just painted the drawer fronts and the areas of the cabinet that would actually show. Once the paint was dry, I lightly distressed the edges and sanded over the surface. I always feel like this is a necessary step with chalk paint because it goes on pretty thick and a quick sanding gives you a much smoother finish. To turn this into Christmas decor, I used some IOD rub-on transfers from the Partridge Lane set. I get all my IOD products from my friend Julie at Julie's Designs and Signs, and right now she has a great deal on Christmas transfers. So if you want to check it out, I always have her website linked in my description box. I loved how the drawers looked so much that I added a few garland transfers from the same package to each side of the cabinet.
5 golden rings, 4 calling birds. Calling birds, okay.
To seal the chalk paint and protect the transfers, I brushed on a coat of clear wax. Then, before wiping off any of the excess, I went over the cabinet again with some very watered down antiquing wax, just enough to give it a hint of age without adding too much color. After that, I wiped everything off with a soft cloth. These glider skates were such an unexpected thrift store find. I could tell they were really old, so it didn't surprise me when my research showed that they were likely from the 1940s. Because of that, I wanted to be extra careful with how I used them. I didn't want to damage their original condition at all. But they are pretty plain and not exactly decorative. So if we're going to use them as Christmas decor, they need a little spicing up. I pulled some greenery and berries from a thrifted arrangement and attached them to the front of the skates using florist wire instead of hot glue. I wrapped the wire around the middle of both skates so that if they're hanging by the leather straps, they won't bang together. To make the greenery a bit more interesting, I wired on a few pine cones from my yard and tied on a bow. But I didn't love that bow, so I tore a strip of flannel from a pair of thrifted pajama pants and used that instead. I think the primitive look of the flannel works so much better with the rusty skates. Now, let's skip ahead 40 years and see what we can do with this decorative sleigh from the 1980s. It came filled with greenery and pine cones stuck into styrofoam. The ribbons were looking pretty sad, but the greenery itself was still in good shape. The sleigh had a thick, shiny varnish and a painted design of blue flowers that didn't feel very Christmassy. So I used a sanding block to knock down some of the varnish and then wiped the design with a cloth and a little goof off. The blue flowers came off easily, but the gold detailing did not want to budge. To add a little more interest to the greenery, I decided to use a 99-cent bird nest I had thrifted. I pulled out the little eggs first and I removed the dusty Spanish moss that was covering the styrofoam in the sleigh. I rearranged a few of the greenery stems to make some space and then attached the nest to the styrofoam using a couple of florist pins. I also wanted to add a bird to the sleigh, so I tucked an extra piece of styrofoam into the seat area. That lifted the bird up just enough so that it would sit a little higher than the nest. I hot glued the thrifted red bird onto the styrofoam, and to freshen up the greenery, I cut apart a snowy stem from Dollar Tree and tucked the pieces around the sleigh. It's amazing how much just $1.25's worth of greenery can really transform an old arrangement. The sleigh's runner blades were removable, so I put them back in place and tightened the screws. Even though the gold design on the side of the sleigh wouldn't come off completely, I decided to go ahead and apply a Christmas-themed IOD transfer right over it. Afterwards, I lightly distressed the transfer with a bit of sandpaper so it looked like it had always been a part of the sleigh. In place of the eggs, I added a couple jingle bells and red berries inside the nest. Then I sprayed the nest with some adhesive and sprinkled on some powdery fake snow. To make the pine cones look snowy too, I brushed a little Mod Podge across their tops and sprinkled on more of that fake snow. Then I finished it off with a bow. Next, let's jump back to the 1950s and see what we can do with this classic Prince Albert tobacco tin. These are still pretty easy and inexpensive to thrift, but they are considered collectible, so I didn't want to do anything that would damage the tin itself. I started by cutting a piece of hard styrofoam to fit inside, and then I grabbed a few snowy pine stems from my floral stash and tucked them into the styrofoam. To create a hanger for the tin, I cut a long piece of heavy florist wire and wrapped it around the open lid. Then I twisted the ends together to make a large loop. I had picked up these miniature cardinal ornaments at Walmart, and I thought they were the perfect size to add. I snipped off the little plastic ring on top of the cardinal and drilled a small hole on the underside so that I could insert a tiny craft stick. That way, I could stick the bird right into the styrofoam without having to use any hot glue. I covered the top of the styrofoam with some Spanish moss, and to give it a snowy look, I dabbed a little Mod Podge onto the moss and sprinkled on some powdery fake snow. Just like with the skates, I thought the Prince Albert tin needed a really rustic looking bow. So I pulled the drawstring out of the pair of flannel pajama pants and used that to make the bow. This little baby Jesus came from a nativity set made in the 1960s, but somewhere along the way he got separated from the rest of the pieces. He was just too special not to use, so I decided to turn him into a Christmas ornament. I started with an oversized clear plastic ball ornament from Dollar Tree. I drilled a small starter hole in the side and then used a pair of sharp scissors to cut out a larger opening. The plastic isn't very thick, so it was actually much easier to cut than I expected. Then I cut out the phrase "Peace on Earth" from one of IOD's gold rub-on transfers. I wasn't sure how well it would stick to the plastic, but it adhered perfectly. After that, I glued some beaded trim from Dollar Tree around the ornament cap to dress it up a bit. And to finish off the opening, I hot glued a sparkly gold pipe cleaner around the cut edge. Then I was ready to add the baby Jesus inside. I put a generous amount of hot glue on the bottom of the manger legs to make sure it would stay firmly attached to the inside of the ornament. After that, I wanted to fill in around the manger with excelsior, so I twisted little bunches of the straw-like material into small balls, added a bit of hot glue, and then tucked them all around the manger. Then I thought it would be nice to have a little star hanging above the baby Jesus. I found a tiny star ornament in my stash, and I just ran the string attached to it up through the ornament cap and tied the ends around the wire. I thought the ornament needed just a little more sparkle, so I added some additional gold tinsel ribbon around the ornament cap and around the cut opening. You might remember this pendulum from a 1970s wall clock that I upcycled in a recent video. I loved the gold design on the front and thought it would make a beautiful ornament, but the back wasn't very attractive. So I printed a vintage image of Jesus in the manger and sized it to fit the back of the pendulum. Then I applied a thin, even coat of Mod Podge to both the pendulum and the back of the paper. I pressed the image into place with my fingers, working out any wrinkles since the back of the pendulum isn't completely flat. Once it was dry, I trimmed the excess paper and used a bit of sandpaper around the edges to remove any remaining bits. I used another one of those sparkly gold pipe cleaners and hot glued it along the outer edge of the pendulum. Then I brushed a light coat of Mod Podge inside the pipe cleaner and sprinkled on some iridescent glitter. Finally, I glued a piece of decorative gold ribbon over the pendulum stick and added a velvet bow to the top. Now this ornament looks beautiful from either side. I love it when I stumble across old architectural salvage or pieces from antique furniture at the thrift store. I found this table base at Goodwill for just $5.99, and from what I've been able to research, it probably came from a table made in the early 1900s. Unfortunately, someone had partially sanded the bottom section, and so I decided to go ahead and completely sand the stain off of the other half of the bottom section. And then I just lightly sanded over the other stained areas, just enough to remove scratches and open up the wood grain so that it would accept some new stain. Once the wood was prepped, I brought it inside and brushed on a water-based dark walnut stain over the entire pedestal. I liked that it didn't look too perfect and that you could still tell that this was really old wood. I planned to attach the pedestal to a wood round that I stained to match, but once I tried it, it was clear the two didn't belong together, so I skipped it. I also thrifted a little Christmas tree for under $4. It was wrapped in burlap over a chunk of concrete-like material, so I knocked most of it off so that the base would fit down into the top of the pedestal. Then I added a bow using a strip of velvet fabric torn from an old dust ruffle. Okay, now I need to know, which decade's project was your favorite? And if you enjoyed today's video, here's another one with even more inexpensive Christmas thrift flips. Thanks so much for watching today. Take care.